Welcome to the weekly discussion of how the technology of today impacts the world of tomorrow. This is the Fill in the Blank podcast, and I'm Ross Strader, joined by my co-host Keith Abels. And you can follow us on Twitter at AskFITB or email us fitbpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to know that you're listening and what you think about the Fill in the Blank podcast. Well, Keith, here we are. It's the WWDC Apple's big presentation today, their keynote, and we're going to be following that, wrapping that up this evening. And so we're going to jump right into the show. So let me tell you what the outline is going to be so that you can follow along with us. We're actually going to follow the outline that Tim Cook followed today in an almost, it was a full 2 hours and some change of a presentation. And he began the thing by saying it was all about software. And it absolutely was. So there was no new hardware announced. It was just software. And the order of the events were they spent a lot of time, probably a full hour or more, talking about iOS 12. And then they moved to watchOS 5. And then they started talking about the Apple TV, the new TV OS. And then the latest Mac OS, which is called Mojave. And that was how they wrapped up the events and the conversation on software. So, without further ado, Keith, we are going to jump right in here in just a moment to iOS 12 as was presented at WWDC 2018.
Thanks for listening to the Fill in the Blank podcast. To support our show, go to patreon.com/FITB. Patreon allows you to support our show on your terms. You can contribute any amount that you want, so you get to decide how much our show is worth to you. A challenge for our listeners is to support us by contributing just $1 per month. That's only 3 cents per day. Your support helps us grow our audience and upgrade our audio equipment. Thanks for listening to the show and supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/FITB. patreon.com/FITB.
All right, Keith, so iOS 12, well, first of all, your general impressions of WWDC 2018. So I know you had a chance, you watched. Did you get to watch the whole thing today?
I did. I watched it in its entirety.
So you watched it in its entirety, and Tim Cook comes out immediately, dispels all the rumors about what might or might not be, that this was a software keynote. That's what they were focusing on, and that's what they delivered on.
Yeah, I was a little sad. I got to be honest with you. I mean, WWDC is a developers conference, and it should be primarily about software. But because Apple has spoiled us so many times with really good hardware launches or announcements in previous years, it's kind of hard not to be disappointed, at least in my mind. So, I tweeted this yesterday. The rumor mill had already at the very last minute kind of dispelled the myth or the rumors about having hardware. And so they telegraphed this a little bit, and I would not be surprised if Apple leaked that ahead of time just to go ahead and just kind of tamp down some of the expectations so that we weren't expecting all these things. And so I didn't really have, in the last 24 to 48 hours, I did not have much expectation that we would see hardware, and of course we didn't. But I was still a little sad when Tim came out in his very polite Southern voice saying, today is all about software.
Well, he did. And not only that, he said it's, particularly when they were talking about the iOS 12, is that they were making sure that it was going to be compatible with a lot of older devices as well.
I like this a lot. If you recall, we were talking about when we did our rumor show, we talked about the iPhone SE 2 or whatever the next generation of the iPhone SE would be.
Yeah.
And that's the least expensive model in the lineup. And I like that device a lot just because it serves a part of the market that Apple typically leaves behind, and that is a more price-sensitive market, which it's still on the high end of those phones, but it is an excellent device. So I was really happy to see that they led off with talking about performance. So here's what they did. Craig Federighi comes out and says, we're going to double down on performance. Now, they didn't say we're going to double performance, but they did say we were going to double down. I don't really know what that means. And it says, so currently iOS 11 goes all the way back to support phones starting at the iPhone 5S. So that would be the 5S, the SE, and the 6, and so on, right?
Yes.
And that's really nice. And iOS 12 will continue to support this all the way back to the iPhone 5S as well. And they gave an example of an iPhone 6 Plus, and they talked about, how much faster apps will load, how much faster the keyboard will load, how much faster the camera will load. But I don't know. It's like faster than what? What they originally launched at?
Yeah.
What they're running now? I don't really know what that means, and, so it is what it is. But I was pleased to see that they're going to make sure that older devices continue to work and work well with these software updates. So for me, I think that's a very big deal for people to hang on to their phones a little bit longer because, iPhones are expensive.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Relative to every other phone, iPhones are really expensive. And I've talked about buying refurbished devices before. And there's a great website called Gazelle.com, and you can buy refurbished devices on Gazelle. I looked earlier today, and you can get an iPhone 6 for $179 on that website. And it's completely refurbished. It's in great shape. That's just a really good deal. So if you consider running the latest, greatest software on a device that is sub $200, that's still really good.
Yeah.
Or if you're going to buy an iPhone SE for $349, I think that's a really good option compared to spending $1,000 or $1,100 on a flagship model. So I like this announcement a lot. It's not like a really sexy announcement, but it is one that's really big and that people won't really appreciate until they've got an older device that still works really well.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump into it then. Let's start with the iOS, and we'll just we'll follow probably as close as we can the different aspects that they talked about. And so they teased the iOS 12. They showed some screenshots. They sort of talked about it was going to be compatible down to the iPhone 5S. And then they jumped right in with AR, which I know that that's one of the things you're looking forward to. You think that's part of the future of technology. So what do you think about their AR presentation?
Well, it started off a little slow. Well, let me say this. To the developers in the room, I think it was probably one of the best parts of the day.
Yeah.
For the normal person out on the street, they may just go, well, okay, that's cool. And what I mean is they introduced a new file format called USDZ. It doesn't really matter what the details are about that. But what this new file format allows you to do is share 3D files across applications. And so you'll start seeing really realistic 3D models show up in different places, like Safari, for example, in the web browser.
Yeah.
So that means I can build these 3D models and then put them in these other apps. That may not seem like a big deal now, but over time, you're going to realize how cool that is. And then they mentioned a new app called Measure. And there should have been a moment of silence for all the apps that do this already on the App Store, because Apple just killed them all.
Oh, absolutely.
So to have a native app called Measure that will allow you to measure things accurately in 3D. So the example they gave was you open the Measure app and Craig pointed it at an old suitcase. The bit was a little cheesy, I thought, but whatever. And so he measured the dimensions of the suitcase. What I thought was missing here was they didn't really carry it to its natural conclusion and then show me what you could do with that afterwards.
Yeah, right.
It just says, look how cool it works, and then that was it. They didn't finish it.
No, and he did the bit with a picture that was inside of a frame, and when he locked onto it, it told you the exact dimensions of the picture. So I guess you could take a picture and it would tell you what size frame or whatever. But he didn't show that you could also measure the outside of the frame, and so I agree with you. He showed you what it could do, but he didn't really show you what it was for, or what maybe some of the application was.
So I have this app that allows you to map out your room or your house.
Right.
It's a really cool app. I'm kind of scrolling through on my phone to find it's called Magic Plan, and Magic Plan allows you to create a floor plan of whatever building you happen to be in, and so you go corner to corner in every room. And it builds a floor plan for that house or for that office or whatever it is that you're looking at. So there's a really great use case for this type of app. They just didn't really mention it. So they're kind of missing the so what thing.
Yeah.
And like, this is really cool. It does this. And then for normal people, you have to tell them why that's cool. You have to think in your head, so what? They didn't give me the so what. Nevertheless, the technology is cool. I think this is I don't think there's anything groundbreaking about this, considering they've already announced a lot of their AR kit support. But it is nice to have a native app, and it will work really well.
Yeah.
What you do with that, we'll see.
Well, and then they got flashy. Then they started to show off the AR.
That's right. So then they got into games, and there's specifically multiplayer games. And they showed a demo of what were they doing, like a slingshot kind of game? There was 3.
Yeah, so they had a big table, and then the augmented reality set up a bunch of different blocks, wooden blocks and shapes on the table, and you had a slingshot, your partner across the table had a slingshot, and y'all were shooting these tiny balls and knocking down each other's blocks, and it even showed a kind of a third person interacting with the game. That they didn't make that really clear, but it was very I thought it was fun. I thought it was it was big. It was very cool.
Yeah, the demo was cool. It had a nice wow factor. And then from there, they moved on to a Lego demo. And they had some guys from the Lego company come out. And this I thought was really neat. So you build your Lego playset, and then through this Lego app, you point your phone or your iPad at the structure you just built, and it makes it come alive, right? You can see through it. It animates any characters that you have in there. You can virtually add characters to it and kind of play out these little scenes. If you have multiple structures that you've built before, it can incorporate the previous ones, and you can build a little virtual city.
Yeah.
And then, kind of play around in this virtual city with multiple people. I thought was really cool. So that multiplayer aspect came to this Lego demo as well. So both of the demos, or the gaming aspect of the demos, I think were awesome. And this shows you the potential that they didn't show us with the Measure app. So in these demos, they showed us why this technology is cool. And in this case, it's just fun.
It is. And they made it sound like, hey, they invited, a few big companies in, Lego being one of them, gave them 2 weeks. Hey, what could you do with this in 2 weeks? And that this was product of a 2-week, 3-week endeavor. But I think what it did was it showed what the possibilities were. And I think it's going to end up being much cooler. I think gaming is going to, I think the iOS 12 is going to create an entirely new gaming environment that's going to explode.
Well, so here's my one question about this.
Okay,
the demo was really neat. The technology works very well. How long do you think you would actually hold up an iPad and play something like this before you just get tired?
Yeah, so they showed them doing the iPad. That may have been for the camera's sake, so that they could show you more screen. But surely you're able to do that with an iPhone. I imagine.
Well, no, you can, but it seems like the Lego game, you need kind of screen real estate.
Yeah.
More screen real estate to make that something that you really want to interact with. So I just have my doubts about that.
Sure.
So the technology works great. How long will we actually hold up a thing between our eyes and the other part of the game? So you've got this thing that sits between us, because this is like, it seems like almost a placeholder for goggles.
Yeah.
Later, right?
Yeah,
and
sure.
To be in some sort of, so I mean, when you see the goggles, you really just think about virtual reality. You don't think about augmented reality. Mm-hmm. And, there's all kinds of rumors about Apple working on some sort of, goggles or display, and everybody's working on something like that. And so the question is that an augmented reality headset? Is that a virtual reality? It may be both. I don't know. So the technology's cool. We'll see. I'm sure that, we will end up, we're a big Lego family as it is. We have a lot of Legos. I know LEGOS is not really the way you're supposed to do the plural of Lego, but I don't care. So plural of Lego is Lego. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah,
Did you know they're a privately held company?
I did.
Not traded on the stock market, worth
did.
billions of dollars.
So anyway, the Lego demo.
Sorry, I looked it up immediately.
So anyway, but it's one of those things like you're not supposed to. Yeah, if you say Lego wrong, then people kind of jump on you. I'm hopeful that the faithful listeners of the Fill in the Blank podcast will give me a break on that one.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so AR, and I still haven't jumped on the AR train, just honestly. I think it is cool, but I'm with you. I think there'll be a lot of gaming aspects. I'm still waiting to see what AR will actually do. Well, besides some cool demos.
I have a good use case. All right, listen. So I mentioned the floor plan app. Right, yes. Where you can build. So what if you did, let's say you're building a house, or even building a shed, right? You're going to go buy a storage shed, right? It's kind of a do-it-yourself or assemble it yourself. Or you download some plans online and you go buy the materials and you're going to build this little shed in your backyard. So it seems like you would have your blueprint on your device. So on your phone or your tablet, this would be a really good reason to use an iPad. And so you've got your blueprint there. And as you're building it, you hold up your iPad and it checks your construction versus your blueprint and tells you where you're off or where you need help or where you missed something or it confirms that everything's perfect. Good job. I think that's a really practical application for something like that.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I do. I think that is right. You can. So, yes, I do think there are going to be some real-world applications. I'm anxious to see what they are. We've been talking about AR for a couple of years now, and so it seems like we're finally at the place that may become more mainstream.
Well, we just mentioned Lego.
Yes.
What if your Lego instructions were delivered via AR instead of the little book?
Well, that would be very cool. I mean,
right, so you just hold up your iPad or your phone, and it says, put one of these types of blocks right here.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think there's a lot of applications we just haven't, the market hasn't had a chance to develop yet. And so once developers get their hands on these tools, then I think you will start seeing really practical, very well done applications.
I agree. All right. Well, so then after they moved into their Photos update. So iOS 12 is going to have a new version of Photos, or at least some new functionality that it hasn't had in the past. And as they were describing it, Keith, it sounded very similar to another Photos app that we've talked about on the Fill in the Blank podcast.
I like all the features that they mentioned today. I like them so much I've already been using them in Google Photos. So it looks like this is just a catch-up kind of thing.
It does a little bit, but it is very nice. I mean, it's there. They're all on your, they're across your iCloud, all of those things. And so the one thing that they did mention about Photos, which was kind of interesting, and it appeared as though they were taking on an Instagram concept, and that is that not only will you be able to, you can do shared iCloud folders or photo folders, things like that. But now what you can do is if, there were 20 people and you were all at an event. So this last weekend, my son graduated high school, and there were lots of us taking lots of different pictures. Well, from there, what we can do is somehow denote that we were all at the same event. And then what the Apple Photos is going to do is it'll then consolidate to everybody that opts in all of the photos that were taken from all the different devices. So I think that's pretty cool.
It is, and that is a feature in Google Photos. It's sharing suggestions. That's very difficult to say.
Yes.
So sharing suggestions is pretty neat. So I'm guessing number one, they're looking at who do you send that to. So you take a picture, and it knows, presumably, at least a few of the people that are in the picture. Do you actually go through and have your Photos app, does it label the people in your photos? I do that, so it knows who's who in my photos. Do you do that on yours?
I don't think so. No, I haven't. Okay. I haven't turned that on. I mean, it does facial recognition. It'll pull faces up if I go for a search, but I don't have it automatically tagging people. No, I don't.
Okay, so it knows. Let's say I take a picture, of you, and we're at a wedding. I take a picture of you and your wife and other people that are at the wedding. So I take a picture. It knows it's Ross. It geotags that photo, right? So it knows where I took it. It knows that you're in it, and then I sent that to you. Those are pretty good indicators that you are who is in that picture, right?
Yeah.
And so then at that point, it will say, oh, you guys are in the same place because Ross took pictures in this exact same place at the exact same time, and Keith sent him pictures from that same place at that same time or whatever. So then it just assumes that we were in the same place, and, oh, maybe Ross would want to share these. And then as if I understood it correctly, it would ask you, do you want to share these photos with Keith? Right, or something like that. So I'm guessing it takes those little pieces of information and puts them together and says, okay, these guys are in the same place at the same event. And, maybe they want to share photos. And it's up to both of us to say yes or no to that.
Right.
So it's not like they're just sucking these pictures off your phone and sending them other places. That would be a nightmare. That sounds like something Google would do. Yeah. And like they would be helping you with your photos. But,
and
so
Apple...
you do need permission to do it.
That is. And Apple has security at the forefront, as they always do in every, in all the things that they're doing. So, all right, well, so that's Photos. If you want a sneak preview of what Photos is going to be, you can log into your Google Photos and check that out. So the next one was Siri. And so I have mixed feelings about this. They did announce a very cool feature that is coming to Siri, and it'll come to Siri across all the platforms that Siri's available. At the same time, I still feel like Siri's behind. It's behind the other AI interfaces that Google has, Microsoft has. I just feel like it's behind. Although
I think the word you're looking for is dumb.
dumb. Okay,
Siri is dumb.
it is kind of dumb, but this is a cool feature that they are going to integrate into Siri. And as we were talking about it earlier, there already is a feature like this in the Apple ecosystem. It's just most people don't use it and it's not super accessible, and they're bringing this to sort of the everyman, and it's called Shortcuts. And so, Keith, tell us a little bit about Shortcuts, and they showed a couple of those demos, but you had a couple of real-world applications.
I think this is probably the biggest announcement, at least for me, that they announced today. And so Shortcuts will allow you to use Siri to enact a series of commands. So they gave a couple of examples. There are commands that are built into apps. And so this is something that app developers can tap into. And so if you're inside an application, they gave the example of Kayak, which is a travel app. Mm-hmm. And so inside the Kayak travel app, there was a little virtual button that says Add to Siri. And so what that does is it unlocks these voice features inside of the Kayak app that you trigger through Siri. So you either press the button or you say, hey, you know who, or whatever the case may be, and then it unlocks this kind of voice functionality. So the Kayak app, whenever you said, so this person is planning a trip, and when you tell Siri, tell me about my trip, or whatever it is you label it, because you can label that set of commands, then it will tell you about your hotel, your plane, and whatever the relevant information is based on the date that your trip was booked. So you have app integration with Siri, which takes this a step further than from what they announced last year, where you could do basic things like get an Uber through Siri and things like that. So that's a really big deal, and that's something that can be integrated into apps, and each application developer gets to decide how they want to integrate that into the app. I think the really big one is the one that goes one step further, and this allows you to build custom commands that then you can label in Siri however you want. So I think this is one of those things we've been asking for a long time. I want to be able to tell Siri to do whatever it is you want it to do, and then she just goes, I say she, right? The virtual assistant just does it.
Right.
So an example that they gave here was being able to build this set of commands about traveling home. So the example was, I'm going to build a set of commands, and when I say the trigger word, when I say Siri, time to go home, or whatever it is you want to label it, then in this example, Siri would send a text message to your roommate letting them know you're on your way home. It will adjust your thermostat to whatever temperature it is you want. It will open up maps and give you directions in your commute time home. And then it will open up the podcast app and start playing your favorite podcast. So you put all those things together and you label it going home, and you say, Siri, I'm going home. And then all those things just activate in that sequence to give you the perfect kind of ride home sequence of information and do the things that you need it to do.
Yeah.
I think this is phenomenal. And this is like Automator, which is what you were referring to, that's been on the Mac forever, but much simpler and very easy to use. Mm-hmm. And so this is a direct result of the Workflow acquisition that they made last year. And so we talked about that briefly. I use the Workflow app all the time. And the Workflow app allows you to take these little commands or these little processes and put them all together like they're little building blocks in an order, in a sequence, and it just runs them. It's like a macro, if you've ever recorded a macro on a computer, and it just runs through the sequence of events. Except it's triggered with your voice, it's used through, it's initiated through Siri, and you get to label it whatever you want to label it. This makes Siri much smarter for your specific use, which is really what everybody cares about.
It is. And what they need to do, and I hope there is an opportunity, or that somebody will begin to, collate and provide forum for. So I'd be interested in knowing, hey, what are the shortcuts you're using, Keith? How are you using those shortcuts? Because that's one of the advantages. So Workflow's out there, but the other big one is if this, then that. And if this, then that really leverages what it can do, because it has such a community and forum out there that people are creating new, new workflows all the time, and they're putting them out there, and you're able to download them and use them. And so it would be nice if Apple somehow facilitated, or some third party facilitated, hey, here are 25 shortcut ideas, and for the month or something like that. So,
well, they did mention a gallery would be available inside the Shortcuts app. So the Workflow app has a gallery of ideas, right? So if you're not sure where to start, it has these different workflows that are already built, and it categorizes them so you can kind of go find an example of something you might be interested in. If this, then that works the same way. They've got galleries and suggested workflows. And so the way they made it sound was they would have something similar in the form of a gallery for Shortcuts. Now, I'm guessing over time, that will be enhanced, and as people come up with really good ones, they'll share them somewhere. I think there will probably be a community that develops outside of that gallery app, because that's so tightly controlled by Apple, that you'll be able to go online and find these little repositories of great workflows that work through the Shortcuts app. I think this is really big news. I think this is a big step forward for Siri. The beauty of this is that this doesn't really require any additional intelligence on Siri's part. Right? You're just taking these building blocks.
Yeah.
You're taking these separate activities that already exist individually, allowing the user to put them together in a sequential order, and then your phone just runs them.
Right.
Siri's really not doing anything. They're just using this as another part of the virtual assistant, which Apple kind of labels and markets under the term Siri. But sure. I think it's a brilliant move. I love it. I think this is something I will use all the time. And I think this is a really smart integration of workflow. And this will also help with the credibility of Siri, because if Siri runs these things properly every time you ask for them, this will restore your faith in something that really has been lacking for a long time from Apple.
Yeah, I think so. And I think everybody, and the truth is this. So I'm complaining a little bit about, I don't think we saw enough AI from Apple today. But the truth is, everybody's just a little bit tired of asking, whether it's Alexa or Cortana or, what's the weather, or tell me a joke, or, I don't know. I think we're tired. I think we're tired of some of those simple things.
All the demos are, tell so-and-so I'm running late. When's my next appointment? Add milk to my list. My shot, right? They're all the same kind of canned dumb demo with these virtual assistants. And I agree with you that this is a really good implementation.
It is. It is an actual implementation of real life productivity. And so I think it's going to be well received. And I think it's going to be used and has even more future to it. Absolutely. Okay.
So I have the first thing I want to try when this is launched. I want to create a shortcut that activates the Google Assistant.
Yes.
So that I can have the best of both worlds. I can activate Siri and then have Siri actually query whatever through the Google Assistant. And so then the Google Assistant will give me my answer, because it will be better than Siri anyway.
It will be. I'll be interested to see how that one works out for you.
But it'll work. Google will make that work. That's a Trojan horse into Google Assistant.
Yeah, that's true.
I bet that works day one.
I think you're probably right. I think you're right.
And they've got a long time to work on it, because it's, this fall, according to Apple. So we'll see when iOS 12 is announced.
Well,
all right, moving on.
Yeah, so they announced some updates to some apps, which isn't super exciting, but I think the idea is that they'll be used more. The News app is going to get an update. The Stocks app is going to get an update. It looked like they actually incorporated some of the Robinhood technology that I was talking about a few weeks ago, the Robinhood app. And so the way that Robinhood actually visually displays stock information. So I think that's probably good. They also had talked about Apple News and the Stock app, integrating Apple News into the Stock app. And so if you use stock apps, Apple wants to be the place that you go to get your stock news from. And then voice memos, they are updating that, and that looked great. And then iBooks is going to have a new, a little bit of a new interface, and they changed the names now. It's not iBooks, it's going to be Apple Books. Any thoughts or opinions about those 4 app updates?
I'm sorry, I was taking a nap.
Yeah,
just like I did during the keynote today. Well, let me ask you this. Okay, of those apps, I use the News app all the time.
Right.
The Stocks app, I don't use. The voice memos, I don't use. iBooks, I don't use. I think I bought, or maybe you can't rent a book. I think I've purchased a book or maybe downloaded even a couple of free books from iBooks.
Sure.
I don't like reading books on my iPad. The screen is just not, for me anyway, for my eyes, it's not a great experience to read on your iPad.
Yeah.
So I've never really used iBooks, and I don't think anything that they've done changes that fundamental problem for me. I'd rather read on a Kindle, which is much easier on the eyes, or a physical book, or listen to an audiobook. I think iBooks is not a big deal. So I mean it's fine. I mean they're fine. These are good updates. If you use those apps, great. If you don't, no change to you. But they did mention an update to CarPlay.
They did.
And I use CarPlay every single day, and this is a big one. Finally supporting third-party navigation apps. So that means Google Maps coming to CarPlay. Waze coming to CarPlay.
Yeah.
Those are major updates, and I'm kind of surprised that they did it. So just like the Siri voice commands or the Siri shortcuts may allow me to use the Google Assistant, it may be just half an extra step, but it would be worth it. I can now use my iPhone, which I'd prefer to use hardware-wise, but with something like Google Maps or Waze when I'm in the car in CarPlay. I think this is a very big deal. Of all the app updates, that one by far was my favorite. What about you?
Yeah, I think it's so I don't have CarPlay in my car. My daughter has CarPlay in her car. I would like to see CarPlay. I'd like to see you be able to integrate it into, if you're in a vehicle that has another system, somehow you'd be able to download CarPlay and end up using it. But I do like that, and it makes me wonder if Apple's finally going to give up sort of the map development and, throw in the towel, because between Google Maps and Waze, they certainly are at least number 3 in the market. And when you go around the world, they're probably less than that.
I don't think they're going to give that up, but I do think it makes sense for them just to do this, because it's becoming more and more important for me anyway, to have great maps. And people, this is like a preference. It's like letting you use Spotify instead of Apple Music if you want to use that. I mean, people need choice, and Apple's primary product is hardware still. Yeah. And so as long as people are buying iPhones, they need to make sure that they're not just being hostile towards iPhone users that they know are going to use some Google services. Yeah. They need to have them on there. So the real question is, can I enact a Siri command through shortcuts to then open Google Maps and do all of that? I'm really just cutting out Apple out of the whole thing except for the phone. And I'm using Siri to then talk to Google Maps to open on my phone, which would open in CarPlay and then take me where I need to go.
It sounds like if the app builds in sort of those building blocks for Siri, then the answer is yes. And like you said, Google will be ready on day one.
Yep.
So, all right, yeah, so that's that. CarPlay, I think that's a great one. Now, here's the one that I thought was, I think this is innovative. So there are places I think Apple's playing catch up. I think there are places that Apple still, by far and away, leads the industry. And this one has to do with well-being. And the whole idea around this was, hey, listen, we know you use your phones and we know you use a lot of apps. And we also know that at the end of the day, you feel like, hey, I spent too much time on this app, or I spent too much time on my phone. And Apple really genuinely seems to care about, people having conversations, people being where they are. And so they're going to soup up Do Not Disturb. They are going to give you much more options on how notifications are delivered. And the final one, which I think is just outstanding, is they are going to let you set up screen time allowances for different apps on your phone. And if you're a parent, you'll be able to do this for your children.
Yeah, this is a really big update. And this is like one of those, what took you so long kind of features. And there's several throughout the keynote today. But these are all just very good moves, and I hate to burst your bubble, but a few weeks ago at Google I/O keynote, they introduced a feature called digital well-being.
Yes, I know, but I'm never going to use that, so.
Kind of does the exact same thing. But, I mean, this is one of those, but again, I mean, clearly this is something that people need, that people have been asking for. I know I've been asking for quite a bit. I help so many people just friends of friends and kind of family friends with, answering their questions about how they should set up their child's phone. Right?
Yes.
What's the right way to do it? I'm sure you get the same thing. And so it's a really big deal for parents, especially, to make sure that they can understand what's going on inside that device that their son or daughter is using. And, especially as we are hearing all this stuff about how your data is being used and where does that data end up, it should make you super paranoid if you're a parent with a teenager, especially using an iPhone, and they have any sort of social media account. I mean, it's just like we got to get some control over this, and we can't wait for the companies like either Facebook or Twitter. I would say Instagram, but that's Facebook. We can't wait for those companies to develop tools that make sense, because they're not going to.
No.
Right? Or they're only going to if they get caught doing something, which, Facebook's always caught doing something. So they're just now starting to implement some of those tools. This really needs to happen on the device. You need it at the device level, because it ultimately can control everything that happens on that device. And so that's where you need these controls. I think all of this is very good. Whether Google did it or whether Google didn't do it, I don't care if this is a catch-up feature or not. I think this is nothing but a win for just people who want to hopefully manage their usage. And you'll still have to have the wherewithal to, manage yourself. Some people can do that, some people can't. And then obviously the tools to help with your kids is just amazing. So the first thing I'm going to do on mine is set up that says, if I've used my phone more than 25 hours in a day, go ahead and shut it down.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I think
that's the first one I'm going to do. So I'm just making a note now. So after 25 hours, I'm done.
Well, I just can't wait, because I hear my kids say all the time, look, I've only been on Instagram about 30 minutes. And the great thing is, every day, as a parent, you can pull up the app and see exactly what apps your kids have been using, how long they've been on them, and, be able to engage in real conversations without speculation. And it also allows you to set up, like, they were talking about today, allowances. Hey, here's an hour of Instagram a day or 2 hours of Instagram a day, and, so have at it. But when that time is done, then that time's done. And so I just think it creates boundaries where we haven't had boundaries before when it comes to these devices in our hands. And I think a lot of people will be happy to set up boundaries, not only for themselves, but certainly for their kids. And so you're taking back some of the control that you seem to be losing.
Yep, I agree. It says you can get weekly reports, like a weekly activity summary.
Yep.
It will give you insight on how you're using the devices, or how you're using your device or your apps. It will give you, like you said, kind of a detailed breakdown of how long you're using each app. That is amazing data. And I don't know if I really want to see mine or not, which kind of indicates the problem they're trying to solve, because we spend an insane amount of time just staring at our screens.
But see, here's a great application of the collection of data. And it's just for you, just for your family, and yet it's data that you really, ought to know about yourself. And here Apple is providing it to you as the user.
So once a quarter at work, I have to do a review, which is the kind of formal review of, how things are going, how things finished the last quarter. Are you trending up? Are you trending down? You kind of deep dive into all your business results and that kind of stuff. Kind of standard, kind of corporate-y kind of thing, right? So it's kind of a quarterly review. I feel like I want to institute that with my kids and make them go through this exercise. And quarterly, they're going to have to kind of tell me about their productivity, with the exception of, normally when you're looking at charts and graphs, you want the line to go up and to the right.
Yes.
I want it to go down and to the right.
Yeah.
Right? So we'll be talking about quarter over quarter declines and things like that. So I'm just kidding, but I can't wait to see the data.
I know, and you can. I mean, as a parent, it gives you, the creativity to, if you want to set up metrics like that and then reward your kids for, for less time spent on social media. Man, I think that's a great thing. I think that gives opportunities to be able to have those conversations. Well, here's the next two that I couldn't care less about: Animoji, Memoji, and it seemed like they were kind of making fun of themselves about it. Then they had fun effects, which I don't care about. If you care about it, that's really awesome. You can go to about minute 40 on the Apple keynote, and you can watch all about it.
Well, hang on. We got to talk about this for just a second.
Really?
Yes.
All right.
They announced a breakthrough feature with Animoji.
Breakthrough feature?
It is. This is a feature that nobody has at this point.
All right.
Tongue detection.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
It sounds kind of gross.
Gosh.
It's like my tongue detector's going off. That doesn't sound good. Tongue detection allows you, if you stick out your tongue when you're making an Animoji, then your Animoji on your phone will stick out their tongue.
Yeah.
This is a real thing that Apple announced today. Tongue detection.
Hey, there are real people being paid to develop that kind of stuff.
This
too,
is true.
So.
And they've got new characters. I don't care about that. Now, let's just say the Memoji or Memoji is the personalized Animoji, so you can make an Animoji of yourself or in your likeness. It's still kind of cartoonish or whatever. Do you ever use the app Bitmoji?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I've used it.
So this is going to basically kill Bitmoji.
It is.
Although Bitmoji's awesome. It's a really cool little, fun. It's a dumb little app where you basically make an avatar of yourself and, just do silly things with messages and stickers and things like that. So Memoji, I don't know if anybody will use this or if they'll use it more than they will Animoji. I don't have a device that does Animoji. That's exclusive to iPhone 10.
Yeah.
You have the iPhone 10. Have you ever done Animoji? Did you do it like day one and then that was it?
I have never done it.
You haven't?
No.
All right. I need you to send me one later.
All right.
Just
I'll
to say
send
you've
you
done it.
one. Yeah.
Okay.
Then
and then they did the fun effects, which is, more filters and stickers and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's like confetti at a birthday party. Who cares?
Yeah.
All right. But FaceTime, this does get an upgrade. So FaceTime is... You're going to be able to have multiple people in a video type conference, and so it's very intuitive. It seemed like a very nice interface. Do it on your phone, your iPad, or your laptop or desktop, and so you can create groups of people that can show up and be in the FaceTime. And not only that, you can incorporate the Memoji into FaceTime, so it doesn't have to be your real face. It can be your avatar that is making all your facial expressions and sticking out your tongue and all of those things inside of FaceTime. But I do like this upgrade to FaceTime. I know that our experience has been we've used Skype for this podcast. We have used FaceTime for this podcast. FaceTime is more reliable. I'll just have to say it's more reliable, and I think from a video standpoint, it likely will be too.
I think this is a big update, and I don't know that FaceTime has been updated since they announced it years ago.
No.
Do you? Has there been a FaceTime update of any kind?
No, not that I know of.
If there has, I'm not aware of it.
No.
So you can now FaceTime in a group of up to 32 people. That's a lot of people.
It is, and it'll be integrated inside of your messages, so you can FaceTime from that screen, or you can have a group. You can turn a group text into a group FaceTime. Essentially, that's what you're going to be able to do. If everybody
I think that's a great feature. I think that's an awesome feature. I use the iMessage in several groups for work-related groups, and to me, that's better than any other third-party chat app. And it's encrypted, so it's secure. So I like to use that for work kind of group chats.
Yes.
And it's got nice functionality of you can like or dislike things and. That. So it's a decent. It's actually a decent chat app, but like you said, everybody has to have an iPhone to do it. And where I work, everybody has an iPhone, so it's handy. But I like the fact that this is integrated into iMessage. That makes total sense. And then the effects and the emojis, like you mentioned, are added in there as well. So I think this is it's one of those it's about time Apple kind of features, but I'm glad it's finally here. Makes sense.
I am too. And they introduced it as we're addressing how people communicate. So it really is keeping up with the greater needs of how we communicate. And, we've talked about on this show, this podcast in the past, people do work remotely. People live remotely. And so this really creates an opportunity to bridge some of those gaps, I think. So I think it's outstanding.
Yep.
All right, well, so that was iOS 12, and that covered just about everything they covered. I imagine there'll be a few other things that are a part of that, but that's what they highlighted in the presentation, the keynote today. And then they went to the Watch OS 5. So now this will be the 5th version of the Watch OS, And they began right off the bat highlighting the health and fitness, and picked a story about how an iWatch, or Apple Watch rather, was used in a crisis or emergency situation, saved a life. They referenced some of the things that we've talked about on this show. So I think they're playing to their strengths, and we've known Apple wants to continue to develop this aspect of the Apple Watch industry moving forward.
Yeah, the Apple Watch primarily, I think, is recognized as a health and fitness device before anything else.
Right.
So, and this is probably just a continuation of the trend that started with Fitbits and, just the different kind of health bands that people have been wearing. And so its strength certainly is in health and fitness. And they actually called out the accuracy of the sensors and, making people feel confident in whatever the data that it shows, that's accurate. And, so I believe so. I mean, I've used a million different types of fitness or health related bands. And I think the Apple Watch, at least in my mind, is probably the most accurate of them all.
Well,
so I think they're right to highlight that.
They are. And the example they gave was the Series 3 and its ability to be able to call emergency services 911 when someone was in the middle of a situation and weren't able to get to their phone, but their watch was on their wrist. And so they were able to do that, and it very likely, because of that, saved a person's life. So, even in the midst of talking about the watchOS 5, they are continuing to create value for their Series 3 Apple Watch, the one that, you're able to make a phone call from away from your phone, those sorts of things.
Yeah, totally.
Well, so then they introduced kind of a cool feature for the Apple Watch, and that is walkie-talkies.
I think this is brilliant. So very simple. I mean, it works like you would think it works, like you would expect it to work from a walkie-talkie. So really what you do is you send somebody that you want to chat with a little message of some sort, and they confirm that it's okay to walkie-talkie, and then you're just pushing the button on your Apple Watch, and you press the button, you talk, it sends your message over to them, they get it, and it just chirps like they don't have to hit a button, it just comes right through, and then they have a chance to respond. So it's like voice messaging almost. Mm-hmm. So it records this little clip, at least that's the way they made it sound. It doesn't sound like it's coming through in exactly real time, but maybe it is, I don't know. It's like a walkie-talkie in that it's one person at a time, and it's meant for very short, just back and forth interactions.
It is. And so you engage it on your watch, from an app, but theirs doesn't have to be running. It doesn't have to be front and center for them to receive the message. So that's the other, you both don't have to be on the app sitting there waiting for each other to say something. You can engage a conversation. I was surprised, though, that this was not built into the iOS 12 for your iPhone. That seems
it still could be.
Yeah.
There's still time for those additions. I don't know if I don't really know what the specific use case is that they uncovered that made this an Apple Watch specific feature, or if this will, go across other devices or not. But it's a good fit for the Apple Watch for sure. I think that's a really cool feature. And I'm assuming it's not going to be a bad thing for Apple if more people bought cellular connected Apple Watches to take advantage of this. It does say it will work on Wi-Fi. So if you're at home or you're at work, things like that. But if you consider you're just out and about somewhere, it's not going to work unless you're on Wi-Fi.
Yeah, that's true.
So, this could be one of those things. It may exist in the Apple Watch specifically for that reason, to maybe drive the adoption of the cellular, or as I like to call it, the red dot Apple Watch.
Yeah,
I think it's a great feature either way. I don't know if people will rush out and buy a connected watch versus the Wi-Fi only version or the non-connected watch because of that one feature, but I bet some people will.
Yeah, I think they will. And then they also did an upgrade of Siri in the watchOS 5 environment, and so they're going to make Siri more accessible, hopefully, continue to drive people to use Siri and, be able to execute your shortcuts from a watchOS 5. So I think that's good. It'll be interesting to see how Siri continues to improve in that environment and how it continues to sync up with the other environments. That was the other thing we talked about, is Siri being different on every single device that you have. And it does seem like they were moving towards more parity of the devices.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So with Siri, I wonder, can I use the commands that I built on my phone using the Shortcuts app, you think?
Well, I thought that you could. I think,
Did they mention that?
well, I might have made that up, Keith, actually. It seems
I mean, it kind of
like
makes
such
sense
a
that it
natural
would.
thing they ought to do, but
Yeah,
I certainly could have made that up.
yeah. If I had more faith in Siri, I would think it would be a lock, but I just don't. Okay, the big story for me, and maybe for you, Ross, this may be the thing that convinces you to get the fancy red dot Apple Watch, whether the current generation or the next one.
Yes.
Finally, the Apple Watch will support podcasts. It just streams them directly from your watch, no phone needed. So we've had to kind of do these little workarounds with third-party apps that kind of work, kind of don't. They're not great. So having native support for the Apple Podcast app streaming through your Apple Watch is brilliant. That means you can go for a bike ride, you can go for a walk, your watch, your AirPods, and that's it. No phone required, and you can just listen to your favorite podcast. Maybe it's fill in the blank. Maybe it's another one, but I think this is a great feature and long overdue for the Apple Watch.
I totally agree. And then there's interactive notifications, which we didn't mention that in iOS 12 necessarily, but we talked about notifications, but again, it's allowing you to interface with the notifications you get in a way that suits you better. And in your watchOS 5, you'll be able to navigate between the apps that you're using currently. You can be, between 2 or 3 different apps and be able to shift back and forth between those much easier than you can right now.
Right.
And then they announced the new Pride band and watch face, which I think is great. I mean, I have the same band I've always had since I bought the watch. So bands.
You're not a band guy?
I'm not a band guy. I know guys are band guys, or girls are band girls.
A few. I have several.
I have no doubt about that, and I'm not judging at all.
When you say you're not judging, it means you're judging.
No.
The same thing as saying no offense. That means offense.
No. I don't have anything against the bands.
I know what I'm getting you for Christmas.
I'm not creative enough to pick out another band. My band
I'll
works.
do it for you.
I mean, here's what I would say. I think Apple did such a fantastic job on the bands that they shipped the watches with initially. There's actually no need for another band. So I would say that I've had this for 3 years now, 3.5. I mean, it's the best watch band I've ever had in a watch, honestly. So
what color is your watch band?
It's black. It's just black. It just matches my cheap black original Apple Watch, which again works perfectly fine. I mean, I'm sure if I got another one, I'd be like, oh wow, that thing was really slow. But from a day-to-day watch, the band works, the watch works. I know it's not waterproof, but I've gotten it wet 100 times. And so I'm telling you, it's just the best watch I've ever had, and I've never felt the need to upgrade it, either the band or the watch.
All right, fair enough. I'm getting you a band for Christmas. Let's move on.
All right. Apple TV. Is it just tvOS?
It is tvOS.
And we're not into versions yet, right?
No, there's numbers. I just can't. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't remember what it is. So this was a little bit interesting. I thought it was. I'm going to be honest with you. I thought the Apple TV, although we certainly see it's a priority, we certainly see that they are wanting to. They focused a lot on the quality of the content that they'll deliver, even to the sound quality of the content they'll deliver. And then they talked about cable box replacement, being able to, but even at that, it felt a little bit like a half measure. I'm not exactly sure 3 or 4 months from now how many other third-party things I'm going to need to have to interface with my Apple TV.
Well, so the Dolby Atmos support is a big deal for audiophiles, right? So, I mean, it's nice that that's there for the people that, will want that. Is that a big deal to me? No.
No. What do you think of Dolby? I mean, I didn't even look. What's a Dolby Atmos soundbar? Because that's what you've got to have, a Dolby Atmos soundbar.
Well, so Atmos, you've probably, you remember, Dolby 5.1, 7.1, all that kind of stuff. And those are, the numbers were references to the amount of speakers that you had. So the Dolby Atmos is a natural just progression. It's part of the evolution of just the Dolby surround sound that you're familiar with. And so really what this is, it's more of a fluid, all-encompassing sound. I don't really know. I can't give you a technical definition of what Atmos is compared to what you've heard before with say 7.1 surround sound. Ultimately, what you get is truly immersive sound, where the sound feels like instead of being left and right and center and all those sorts of things that you're used to, kind of that nomenclature with speaker placement. Mm-hmm. Then this is more fully immersive. The sound is all around you. And so that is done in different ways. Through a sound bar, it's done probably mainly just through computation. And so it's similar to what the HomePod is supposed to do, right? Where it kind of figures out your room,
yes,
and then it fills up the room, and it fires the right speakers inside that thing based on where it's located and which direction it's faced, and the shape of your room and all that good stuff, and it's supposed to fill up your room. So consider that kind of a similar version for Dolby Atmos support. So you can get Dolby Atmos in various formats. The one that they mentioned today was a sound bar. Right. So if you buy a new sound bar that supports Dolby Atmos, it's probably going to sound pretty good.
It is. And the vision I had was like,
it's nice to add this.
Laying in the middle of a waterbed, where
I don't feel that vision in my head.
The movement on all sides. I mean, you're kind of immersed there in a big sack of water right there on the top of your bed. So, yeah, I had one waterbed growing up, and I remember that.
I don't need to hear about it.
Well, there you go.
Thank you.
Wasn't anything creepy. I'm just saying I had a waterbed. So,
well, but waterbeds are just kind of creepy. I had a waterbed when I was a teenager too. But anyway, let's move on.
Did you ever wake up that one morning and realized, hey, I'm soaking wet? I slept.
No, I never had an issue with it.
I slept in a half a bed of water last night. Yeah,
I fortunately never had that issue.
I did once. That was it. All right. So, and I don't know. I do like the whole single sign-on, so you'll be able to sign on. You don't have to go into every single app and authenticate every single thing. So I am super happy about that. I just don't feel like we're all the way there on a solution of how are you just going to turn on your Apple TV and start watching what you want to watch. I wish that they were able to, consolidate what you were going to view inside of a particular. I just hate that they're. I like Apple TV. Apple TV is kind of collating everything that you're watching and all the things that are available across all the different apps and networks. But even at that, you go to watch a show, you end up bouncing into another app, and that whole thing seems cumbersome to me.
Yeah, there's just a lot of different players that have to make this work. So, you've got content creators, you've got networks, you've got, distributors, there's just a lot of reasons why this is still kind of messy, and Apple's not going to be able to solve all of those. They can actually only affect, part of it.
Yeah. And if you live in a place that has like a sudden link monopoly, as I happen to live, some of the things they talked about, you're never going to get to see anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, eventually this will get figured out. And, today's update, honestly, so your issue doesn't sound like it's with the Apple TV itself. It's just with how content is distributed.
It is. That's
right.
And
that's something a piece of hardware is necessarily going to solve. So these are nice, just incremental updates to the Apple TV. It's a little pricey compared to every other box on the market. And so I think they're just trying to position it. I think they're trying to justify the price of that. So 4K and HDR support. I think a brilliant move that Apple, did when they announced the 4K Apple TV. If all the content that you already own that you bought from Apple or through iTunes, they upgraded that for you automatically. You didn't have to pay anything extra for that. And I think that was a really smart move because that keeps you using your Apple TV. It doesn't give you the excuse to say, you know what, I'd have to buy all these movies again, so I might as well just switch over to the Amazon Fire TV, or I might as well get a Roku. So I think that was a really smart move. And if they position themselves like they position their other hardware at the high end of the market and support that with these hardware features like Dolby Atmos support for audiophiles, 4K and HDR support for people that have those types of televisions, it's just another reason to either stick with an Apple TV or consider an Apple TV if you're in the market. So, are these, big kind of groundbreaking updates? Not necessarily, but I think they're necessary And, it just continues to create value for Apple TV for people that are already in the Apple ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, so some of the listeners at this point in the show might be wondering, well, that is great. And when they think about software, their minds go to their computers, laptops or desktops. I mean, that's typically or traditionally what we've thought about software environments. I think if you didn't already realize it, you would watch this keynote and realize that that's actually not what anybody means when they talk about software anymore, and that our desktops and laptops, that software is very utility, very functional. And so when Apple announces an update to the Mac OS, which is going to be the operating system on your laptop, on your desktop, it was in fourth place in the presentation, and probably, Keith, I think you're the one that said it, probably fourth place in their priority when it comes to software. So on the one hand, Apple has a great OS. So, they've already done a phenomenal job and made years of investment in their OS. At the same time, that leaves it at this point when they do an update, there just doesn't seem to be a lot to talk about.
Well, there's a lot of little stuff to talk about, but very few really big stories here. We'll get to the one big story in just a minute, but it is the fourth out of four topics they talked about today. And I think the order that they went in today is the exact order of their priorities. They spent the most time and led off with iOS, right? iPhone is the big moneymaker, not even close. iPhone and then the services that are attached to iPhone, like Apple Music and iCloud storage, things like that. They spent the majority of the time on that, and that's where most of their money is coming from, so you can't blame them for spending that much time on that. Then they went to Apple Watch, which is an up-and-coming category for them. It's only getting better, and so I think that's it rightfully in the number 2 spot. Apple TV, another up-and-coming product for them that's attached to a service, which is selling movies. They're soon to, the rumor is that they're building their own content and that sort of thing. And then the Mac, and I don't really know what to say about this. I love my Mac, but I use it, of all my Apple devices, I use it the least.
Right.
I use it, the primary reason for using my Mac is recording this podcast. And I do a handful of other things on it, but I'm most of the time on my iPad or on my iPhone. Mm-hmm. I can imagine a world where I just had an iPad and an Apple Watch, and I'd be good. But anyway, let's jump into some of the updates they did talk about today.
Yeah, so if you edit video, you're a pro user, which means you have pro apps that are, renderings, softwares. You got to edit movies, you need to render that. You're editing large quantities of sound, and you need to render that. So all the things underneath the software is going to make that hardware run more efficiently. The file sizes are going to come down. And so all of those things, I know in the professional world, those are big deals. That's a huge, those will be well received, but to the average person, we very likely will not, know the benefit, even if we reap the benefits of it. But the thing that they did talk about that I thought was very interesting is Apple went head on with the idea of security, and particularly security related to when you are browsing the internet. So Safari will be updated in such a way that it's almost as though they were like telling trade secrets today. So you go to different websites and they're capturing your identity profiles, they're capturing what they called fingerprints. So, the example they gave is if you open up a website, that website then automatically loads at the bottom with Facebook chat for comments. Not Facebook chat, but a Facebook feed where comments are left. That just opening that website, whether you leave a comment or not, is gathering fingerprint information from you and how you're using it and where you're surfing and on the web, and seeing ads follow you from web page to web page to web page. And Apple is cutting that off. Yeah,
so two big things here today. They addressed how you're being tracked through cookies, which a lot of people are familiar with the term cookies, and it's just a tracker that's input. It resides on a website, and it follows you around the web. And so that's what those like buttons are, and those comment boxes and things like that. And then they mentioned the fingerprinting, which is a kind of a combination of different components that identify you uniquely. So they mentioned the configuration of your computer. When you're browsing, that information is exposed, and so you can kind of use that as an identifier. When you put that on top of things like all the fonts that are installed on your computer, and then any plugins that you have downloaded on your machine, it takes those kind of separate pieces of information, puts them together, and builds this fingerprint and says it doesn't necessarily say this is Ross Strader, but it recognizes this as you. And that means that this machine is identified or tied to you. And so all of the behavior tied to that machine then is tracked back to you as hopefully an anonymized user, but who knows what all they're looking at. So two things. Safari's just going to start blocking that stuff. Start blocking the like buttons and the trackers. Not necessarily like they won't be there, but in the background, it won't let them suck your data out of it. That's not a very technical way to look at it, but that's really it. It's basically going to block cookies.
It is. And if you want to participate, you have to opt in to do that.
That's right. And then the other part is with the fingerprinting, it's only going to expose, or it's actually going to show all Mac users with basically the same configuration of their machine. It will only show system fonts. So that means if you've downloaded any other fonts, it won't show them, and it won't share any of your plugin information either. So there won't be a unique fingerprint for you. It will be more anonymous, and most Mac users will have very similar fingerprints, for lack of a better term, so that you're not identifiable kind of individually like you are now. Those are two really big things. And quite frankly, this was one of the last things they talked about in the entire keynote. Nowhere before this do I remember them really talking about security or privacy. And this is one of their hallmark features these days, especially with all the drama around Facebook. Google screwing up Google I/O with their Google Duplex demo, which looked really cool at the time, but then they just got hammered for after the fact. They didn't mention privacy or security all the way through this keynote up until almost the very last minute. And when they did, it was big. And the question becomes, is this just for desktop Safari? Is this on mobile Safari? What? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, they talked about it in the section on Mac OS, and I think we are left to wonder. I think one of the questions coming out of this keynote is that going to be Safari behavior across all the devices. So is that going to be Safari behavior in an iOS environment, or is it only on your Mac OS environment? And so I think it's a question that probably within the next couple of days will get asked and answered out there on the tech blogs. But it was interesting. They did not make reference to it being Safari across all your environments. And so I would be... So I love that that's an update for the Mac OS. I like that it kind of anonymizes your machine, and it looks like every other Mac machine out there to all the things gathering data, but it would be nice to know that your iPhone did that and your iPad did that and all those things. So the other thing, the other sort of final thing of the Mac OS is we talked about it, I guess, last week or the week before, and we talked about the concept of marzipan, and that was sort of a made-up name out there. The idea of the iOS and the Mac OS sort of coming together or meeting at some, designated point, down their two roads. And they did previewed a preview. Essentially, it was a sneak preview of a preview, and it, led you to believe that what was coming was the ability for your iOS apps to run on Mac OS. Now, that would be dependent upon the app developer building that capability in, but there will be the possibility for your iOS apps to run on your Mac OS and be integrated with things like your keyboard and your mouse. And so I think that's exciting. And Apple's saying, hey, 4 apps that we're going to do that immediately with are news and stocks and voice memos and Home, yeah, they're going to bring Home app to the Mac OS. So I think that's exciting. I think it'll be interesting to see what app developers do with that, and the the ability that people have to run those things on a Mac OS environment.
Yeah, this is actually really big news. And so, the marzipan we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we didn't really know exactly what the implementation was. And that's what really was the mystery was, when we talk about integrating these two things, to what do you actually mean? And it really all depends on what Apple does with the integration. And so the question, they put up on the screen today, Craig Federighi did, are you merging? He gets asked this question all the time. Are you merging Mac OS and iOS? And the answer, he put a gigantic no up on the screen. No, we're not merging them. Instead, what they're doing, I think we're splitting hairs here a little bit, but what they're doing is allowing iOS apps to run on Mac OS, which I think is a great idea. It makes total sense. It's a big deal for Chrome and Chrome OS using Android apps. I love doing that on the Chromebook that we have in our house. I think it makes total sense that you would be able to do that on your Mac where it makes sense. I think some apps make a lot of sense. Some apps make a lot of sense on your Mac, some don't. And so we'll see, again, like you said, what developers come up with. And Apple is going to be testing this internally in the meantime with the apps that you already mentioned. And this will be released to developers sometime in 2019. So it's another one of those things that I just can't. Apple drives me crazy with this stuff sometimes. They've been doing this a lot lately where they say coming next year.
Right.
I'm like, what?
And
why'd you even tell me about it? I guess this to me almost sounds like there was either so much talk about it or they're expecting, something to be announced or something coming out. They know something, obviously, they know a lot of things we don't, obviously, but I feel like they're just trying to get ahead of a news cycle here a little bit, and so they could release it on their own terms and not somebody else's. But otherwise, why talk about something so far in advance?
I don't know. You'd think they'd be a little gun shy after the HomePod and the wireless charger.
The AirPower that's still not out.
I know.
Yeah. Anyway, but it's a big deal nonetheless. So
but I think what was clearly answered is that desktop functionality is not coming to your iOS device. It's not coming to your tablet. It's not coming to your phone. It's going to stay on your desktop. And if there is going to be something that travels in one direction, it'll be the use of your iOS apps on your desktop.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. I don't really think there's a need. If you're going to integrate, it makes sense to make macOS more iOS-like, not the other way around.
Yeah, I think so.
That makes total sense. Maybe we can discuss this further in the third hour of our show.
Yeah, we'll do that in the third hour. All right, that's the wrap-up. That's the WWDC 2018. Hey, listen, we recapped the show in an hour. It took them 2 hours to talk about all those things. We did it in an hour. So you could call this the abridged version, Keith, if you wanted to. But what about your blank check this week? Let's wrap this up and tell us about your fill in the blank check.
All right. So I've referenced this book several times before, and it's The Attention Merchants. And this is written by an author, Tim Wu. He also wrote a book called The Master Switch, which is a great book. I recommend that as well. And so The Attention Merchants really kind of explains how we got here as it relates to your personal data being used to target you for just marketing purposes. So, we've been talking about Facebook and Amazon and, companies and Google that use your data in, selling it to advertisers. And then these things are following you all over the internet and you're getting just micro-targeted with these ads all over the place. How did we end up here? And so the Attention Merchants is basically the history of companies, primarily media companies in the beginning, selling your attention to advertisers. And so it goes through the history of not just advertising, but the ways that you're marketed to and how this works and how it came about and how we ultimately ended up starting with radio and how we ended up with Google and Facebook. How did we get here? So, all the way through this book, you would think that it would be a pretty straightforward story, but it's not. It's a fascinating kind of history lesson on how your attention is bought and sold every day and has been for decades. And so I mentioned a few weeks ago on one of our shows, the early radio shows. That's when the radio broadcasters figured out that their customer was not the person listening to the broadcast. Their customer was the advertiser sponsoring the broadcast. And what their product was your attention. You're not the customer when you're listening to the radio. This was, in the, I think it was the 20s, maybe 30s. And so it kind of starts there. Actually, it predates that a little bit, but that's really where kind of the modern modern day marketing comes from is what those broadcasters figured out in the 20s and 30s. And so Google and Facebook were kind of inevitable with the technology that we have today. So anyway, it's not necessarily a quick read, but it is very in-depth, and it's just comprehensive, and you will learn a ton about all kinds of stuff. So if you're even remotely interested in kind of how we ended up where we are today, then I highly recommend The Attention Merchants by Tim Wu. Excellent read.
All right, and you'll put a link in the show notes for us for that.
Indeed.
All
Tell us
right.
about yours, Ross.
Well, Keith, I've got to tell you, I don't know if this is a blank check as much as it is a confession, but I did something this last week I have not done in literally over 15 years. I walked into a Best Buy and I walked out having purchased a Hewlett-Packard computer.
Wow. Nice job wrapping up the Apple show here with buying a Windows machine.
Yeah, I know. I feel kind of dirty about it, but I'm going to tell you here's the reason. My son just graduated from high school. Part of that graduation in preparation for college was that we are getting him a computer. My daughter dutifully made me so proud. What she wanted, of course, was a MacBook Pro. We were able to secure that quite easily. My son, and what I feel is an open act of rebellion against his family, really, Keith, is the only way I can say it. I just think it's an open act of defiance and rebellion. Wanted an HP Spectre, and so he did all the research. I really thought he was going to land on one of the new Surface Pros. I think those are pretty cool, but it's not what he wanted. And in fact, not the 13-inch. He wanted the 15-inch. It's an all-in-one, two-in-one device. The keyboard actually folds over to the back, and it becomes a big, gigantic, bulky tablet that you would use for nothing. But anyways, that's what he'd like. And but I will say this. So the computer is a fantastic computer. I played around on it for a little bit. I haven't been on Windows 10 in a long time. It was more intuitive than I imagined that it would be. The computer is lightning fast. It wasn't anywhere. I mean, it cost money, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't anywhere near a 15-inch MacBook Pro. It was far less than that. He kind of got an old mouse, and thought was funny. You have to, one of the things you have to decide that you're going to do there is you have to buy your version of antivirus. And so there are actually tons of options. There's the McAfee, there's the Norton, what we were advised by our Best Buy associate, that those are actually terrible. And so we went with one called WebRoot, and now it gets to update every time he opens his computer. So anyways, the HP Spectre, I will say it's a beautiful machine. I think it's a great box. It's very well made. It really is very elegant looking. It is lightning fast. It does everything he wants to do. He's always worked on a Mac in our home environment, but at school they use Chromebooks, they use PCs, and so he's familiar and gets around, and that's what he wanted. He's going to be a business major in college and felt like he wanted to show up with a business computer. So,
well, speaking from the corporate world, in my middle-of-the-road Dell company-issued Windows machine, that's probably not a bad decision on his part.
Yeah. No, I think it's right.
I've heard very good things about the HP Spectre.
Oh, it's
as far as what you mentioned, hardware-wise,
yes,
performance-wise, I've heard very good things. So,
well, I do make jest of it a little bit, but it really is. I mean, it is a fantastic computer, and man, comes with the stylus, which works great. I mean, the Apple Pencil's phenomenal. This works just as well, actually. So I did not see any difference. There was no lag. I thought, man, that's really great. And so, yeah, it was good. He really likes it, and I'm proud for him to have it. And so we'll see. You
guys should do one of those like father son, I'm a Mac, I'm a PC commercials.
Yes, we should. And what's funny is it would have been, it was totally flipped. It was the old man that used the PC, yep, and the young guy using the Mac. And I think you're going to see a generation of a bunch of old guys like us, diehard
yep,
Mac guys, and, all our kids buying these 2-in-1s, which there's a lot of things attractive about that.
Yep. I agree.
So I'll put a link into the show notes for anybody interested in the HP Spectre. Thanks for listening to Fill in the Blank, where we discuss how the technology of today impacts the world of tomorrow. We'll be back next week with another episode, and in the meantime, you can find us on Twitter at AskFITB or email us at fitbpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think of the show, and if you like the show, tell your friends. And please rate us and review us on iTunes or from wherever it is that you're listening to the podcast. And remember the Fill in the Blank $1 challenge. Your support goes a long way. We'll see you again next week here at Fill in the Blank.